Recently, I finally checked off the biggest dream I'd carried my entire life. I bought my own apartment. Owning a place that was truly mine had always felt like the ultimate goal, the one thing I wanted more than anything else. When I was growing up, I never even had my own bedroom. Part of that was because my parents couldn't afford it. We were a low-income family barely scraping by, but it also came down to the fact that they hadn't been ready to be parents in the first place. They didn't choose to have me out of love or desire for a child, they had me because relatives pressured them into it. In our culture, being child-free is seen as shameful, so my parents gave in to family expectations. I wasn't born out of excitement or planning, but because they were told they had to. Since they had no savings and were already living hand-to-mouth, I was just another expense piled onto them. We moved from one rundown place to another, always the cheapest housing available. Many times the apartments were cramped, unsafe, or barely livable, and even then the rent was still a stretch. I still remember nights when we had to skip meals, pretending we weren't hungry so we wouldn't run out of food completely. My clothes were always secondhand, donations from others or cast-offs that never fit right and were often worn to threads. The few toys I owned weren't bought for me, they were given away by strangers. My dad worked long shifts in a factory, but the pay was so low it barely covered the basics. On top of that, what little he earned wasn't always used wisely because he struggled with gambling. My mom picked up cleaning jobs here and there, but her money usually went toward her own habits, getting her hair or nails done, or buying cigarettes. Essentials for me were always an afterthought. I went to public school, and from the very beginning I knew I didn't fit in. My clothes were dirty, my hair uncombed, and my hygiene wasn't where it should have been. To kids my age, those things stood out, and I became an easy target. The teasing was relentless, mocking how I smelled, how I looked, everything about me. On top of that, I had bad eyesight as a child and desperately needed glasses. I begged my parents for weeks before they finally gave in, annoyed and reluctant. When I finally got a pair, it was like the whole world opened up. I could actually see, read clearly, and even felt like maybe school could be my escape. But that joy didn't last. Some classmates broke my glasses just for fun, and I was devastated. I didn't even dare tell my parents. I knew they'd just accuse me of being careless instead of realizing what had really happened. Luckily, one teacher noticed, and without embarrassing me or making it a bigger issue, she quietly helped me get another pair. She didn't even inform my parents, which was a huge relief. At home, happiness wasn't something I ever felt. My parents were miserable in their own marriage and lives, and they poured that frustration onto me. My dad was harsh to the point of cruelty, so strict that even making the slightest noise earned me a scolding. Every day felt like walking on eggshells. My mom wasn't any kinder, though her control came in different ways. She micromanaged my friendships, constantly pressuring me to associate only with kids from wealthier families. According to her and my dad, my only job in life was to study hard and eventually pull them out of poverty. My success wasn't mine, it was supposed to be their escape plan. Once they realized I had a natural ability at school, they latched onto it. They bragged endlessly to friends and neighbors about my achievements, as if they had any part in it. It was never about my well-being, it was always about what I could do for them. Carrying their expectations felt like suffocation. So when I earned a full-ride scholarship to college thanks to my grades and low-income background, it felt like a rare light at the end of a dark tunnel. My parents were thrilled, convinced my education would guarantee them a better life. In their minds, college was my ticket to a high-paying job that would finally lift them out of poverty. But once I actually got to campus, everything shifted. Living away from home for the first time was eye-opening. Without their constant control and criticism hanging over me, I realized I didn't know them my whole life. Slowly, I started to pull away. I avoided their visits by claiming I was busy with school or work. I skipped going home on breaks, instead staying with friends whose homes felt warm and safe in ways mine never had. I even got a part-time job to support myself, though I kept it secret. I knew if they found out, they'd demand the money. And eventually, they did find out. The moment they learned, they started demanding I send money home. When I refused, the phone calls turned ugly. They hurled insults, called me ungrateful, and even threatened to show up on campus to shame me or tell my friends how selfish I was. After all their sacrifices, how dare I not help them? In the end, I caved and sent the money, just to keep the peace. Graduating was my real chance to break free. I found a job in another city and left without a word, even changing my number so they couldn't reach me. For the first time in my life, I felt independent and free. But peace never lasts long. A relative eventually slipped up and revealed where I was, and before I knew it, my dad showed up at my workplace. The sight of him filled me with rage. Instead of listening, he started berating me for cutting off contact and claimed I had no right to abandon him and mom because I was their daughter. I looked him in the face and told him I wanted nothing to do with him. I told my dad to leave, but instead he looked me up and down, pointed at my office building, and made a comment about my designer clothes. He said it was obvious I had landed a well-paying job. I tried brushing it off, but he wasn't buying it. Then he dropped his demand. I had to send him $500 every single month, no excuses. According to him, that was the only way he and my mom would stay out of my life. I was furious. It wasn't just the nerve of it, it was the painful realization that even after all these years, my parents still saw me as nothing more than an ATM. This wasn't about love or family. It was blackmail, plain and simple. Of course, I could have refused, but I was only just starting out in my career. I couldn't risk them showing up at my job, making scenes, or worse, talking to my boss or coworkers about our family mess. The embarrassment alone could have ruined me. So, against everything in me, I gave in. And that's how it started. For the last 12 years, I've been sending them $500 every month. Not because I wanted to, but because it bought me silence. As long as the money kept coming, they stayed out of my life. At this point in my career, I earn enough that the $500 barely makes a dent. Honestly, I see it as paying for peace of mind. They've never shown up again, never made new demands, and the only way they keep tabs on me is through relatives or social media. I have no idea what they actually do with the money, and truthfully, I've never cared enough to ask. When I finally bought this apartment, I wanted to celebrate. I threw a big housewarming party, fully aware they'd probably find out online. For once, I didn't care. This was my milestone, my victory, and I wanted to enjoy it without them. Sure enough, my mom called shortly after seeing the post. Her voice was sharp, dripping with accusation, asking why she and my dad hadn't been invited. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told her that sending them money every month was more than enough, and I didn't feel any need to include them in my life beyond that. That honesty didn't sit well with her. She launched into the same old speech I'd heard countless times before: children are supposed to live for their parents. Every other family she knew had better relationships than ours, and I was the ungrateful exception. She demanded to know why I hated them so much, why I couldn't just get over the past and be the ideal child they wanted. I wasn't in the mood for it. I tried to cut her off with an excuse about being busy, hoping she'd hang up like she usually did. But this time, she didn't. Instead, her tone shifted. She told me there was another reason for her call. My dad had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 2 months ago. I was stunned. This was the first I'd heard of it. For a moment, I didn't even know how to respond. Part of me doubted if she was telling the truth, but if it was real, even after everything, I didn't want to imagine my dad suffering like that. I'd hated my parents for so long, but the thought of him facing such a brutal disease stirred something: sympathy, maybe even pity. I asked her why she hadn't told me sooner. She admitted that both of them had felt guilty. They'd been taking my money for years, and she said they couldn't have survived without it. Both had only ever earned minimum wage, and my payments had basically kept them afloat. Now, with Dad losing his job after the diagnosis, their financial situation was worse than ever. My mom's part-time cleaning work wasn't enough to cover rent, food, or the mountain of medical bills. Then she started begging me to meet them. She said Dad might not have much time left and that nothing would make him happier than seeing his only child again. Her words were emotional, almost desperate, and for the first time in years, I felt guilt gnaw at me. Not because I thought I owed them anything, but because I couldn't ignore the seriousness of it. He might have been a terrible father, but he was still my father. If the diagnosis was real, he could be running out of time. I didn't even know what stage the cancer was in, or what his chances were. I just knew I couldn't dismiss it outright. After sitting with it for a couple of days, the decision weighed heavier on me. After a few days of thinking, I finally made a decision. I wasn't ready to completely forgive, but I would give them one last chance. Since work kept me from traveling, I agreed to let them come to me instead, but everything would be strictly on my terms. I bought their bus tickets and even booked them a hotel for one night. What I didn't do was open my apartment to them. I wasn't anywhere near ready for that kind of closeness. Still, I thought a lunch at my place would be a reasonable compromise, a chance to talk things through face to face. The day they arrived, I had no idea what to expect. The moment I saw my dad, my heart sank. He looked weak, frail, and worn down, like a shadow of the man I remembered. He shuffled over, barely able to walk, and handed me a stack of medical papers and hospital bills. As I flipped through the documents, the truth stared me in the face. My mom hadn't been lying. This wasn't some manipulation or guilt trip. The cold, clinical reality of his cancer was spelled out in those records. What shocked me even more was what came next. My dad, who had never apologized for anything before, actually said he was sorry for the way he treated me, for forcing me to send money every month. For a brief moment, I felt something crack inside me. Maybe he finally understood the damage he'd done. We talked for a while. I told them about my job, my life here, and in return, they kept marveling at my apartment. They walked through each room, repeating how proud they were of me, how unbelievable it was that I lived in such a big, beautiful place on my own. A couple of times, they even made little comments about how the place was too big for one person. That's when my mom slipped in a suggestion. She said she'd love to stay here for a few days, maybe even explore the city while she was at it. I shut that down immediately. I reminded her I had already paid for the hotel and their bus ride home. If they didn't leave the next day as planned, then they'd be on their own, because I wasn't going to be their backup plan. She went quiet, visibly stung, but then my dad chimed in. He asked why I couldn't be a little kinder to them, especially since it had been so many years since we'd last seen each other. His tone implied that I was being cold and unfair. That was it for me. I couldn't hold back anymore. I scoffed and told them exactly what I had bottled up for years. I reminded them that they had done nothing for me growing up, no real support, no love, no stability. All they ever did was ride on my back, using my academic achievements as their bragging rights, while never giving me the care every child deserves. I reminded them that even now, despite everything, I was still sending $500 every month. I told them they had never once asked about my well-being, never shown up when I was struggling, and the only reason they were standing in my apartment at all was because Dad had cancer. They couldn't blame me for not feeling attached anymore, because the truth was, I wasn't. My dad's face turned red, and my mom broke down crying. Maybe I was harsh, but I couldn't lie to them or myself anymore. The truth was ugly, but it was real. Sending them that money every month was easier than cutting them off entirely. It was my way of keeping them at a distance, quiet, away from my new life, and hidden from the people who actually mattered to me. Because to be honest, my parents were my biggest source of shame. After lunch, I told them it was time to head back to their hotel. I felt like we'd said enough. But just as I was ready to end it, my dad stopped me. He said there was something else he needed to ask, and in that instant, I knew. Of course, this visit wasn't just about seeing me. With them, there was always a hidden agenda. I asked him directly what he wanted this time. That's when he pulled out the medical bills again and started begging. He pointed to the costs, explaining that there was no way he could pay for treatment. He admitted it was shameless, but he was hoping I'd step in. I told him flat out no. Sending $500 every month was already more than they deserved, and I wasn't about to take on his medical debt too. But he wouldn't let it go. He gestured around my apartment and said if I could afford to buy something like this, surely I could afford to help with his treatment. He insisted he had no one else to turn to, only me. I reminded him that his bills weren't small, they were massive, and even with my income, there was no way I could cover them. That's when he made the suggestion that almost knocked the air out of me. He looked at me, dead serious, and said maybe I should sell my apartment. He told me I should sell my apartment so I could use the proceeds to pay for his medical treatment. He argued that his life mattered more than any possession I might own and that, as his daughter, sacrificing something material was the very least I could do. My mom joined in, repeating the plea over and over, promising with tears that if I cleared the bills they would never bother me again. She kept swearing that once I helped this one last time, they would leave me alone forever. Honestly, the combination of my dad's entitlement and my mom's dramatic performance left me nearly speechless. They were never satisfied, every visit seemed just another opportunity to ask for more. They genuinely acted as if my achievements, my stability, and even my home were theirs to claim whenever they felt like taking them. Despite the apologies my dad had offered earlier, this moment exposed the truth. To them, I was still a lifeline, not a person. Deep down I hadn't been surprised, I'd always suspected that their reunion would come with strings attached. My dad's illness had become just another lever for them to financially exploit. Yes, I wanted him to live, but his health was ultimately his responsibility. He'd chosen to drink and gamble for years, neglecting both the family and himself, so why should I be the one to clean up the consequences of his choices? Besides, I'd been sending them money for years, why hadn't they saved any of it for emergencies like this? When I confronted them, my mom, flustered, tried to explain. She said much of the money went toward rent and groceries, which I could accept, but then she admitted they'd spent some of it traveling. I asked why they would prioritize trips and dining out instead of putting anything away for a rainy day, and Mom said they finally felt entitled to live a little after years of scraping by. She claimed that once I started sending them $500 a month, they believed they could use it as they pleased, including on travel and nicer food. She also argued that they'd always assumed they would eventually move in with me when they were older. After all, children are supposed to care for their parents. Hearing that felt like the last straw. I shook my head in disbelief and told them flatly that I had no intention of caring for them in old age. I said coldly that how they chose to spend my money over the years was their business, but that didn't mean I was obligated to fix the mess their choices created. I wasn't giving them another penny. My words hung in the air, they were firm and final. Realizing I meant it, my parents scrambled to argue. Dad's frustration flared, and Mom started crying again, begging me to change my mind. I leaned in and said I was done with the conversation and that I wanted them to leave my house immediately. I warned them if they stayed, I'd cut off the $500 I'd been sending each month. The room went silent, the threat hit its mark. They knew I wasn't bluffing, and they knew they couldn't afford to lose that money. Though they looked furious, they packed up and left. After they were gone, I talked it over with my boyfriend and some friends, and most of them said I'd been too harsh given my dad's diagnosis, that I should show more compassion and at least help with some bills. So here's the update I keep getting asked about. Why did I give them money all these years? I probably made this clear in the main story, but I'll repeat it. Yes, I could have refused, but it was easier to pay $500 a month than deal with the chaos of them showing up, dragging my coworkers or friends into our family drama, or facing repeated embarrassment. That monthly payment silenced them and let me keep my life private. It wasn't much to me after years in corporate, moving up the ladder and living child-free, but it bought me peace. And why did I let them visit at all? Because I could see my dad was dying. During lunch I watched him, the way he moved, the way he spoke, and I knew he wasn't well. So I don't regret meeting them. Part of me suspected this could be my last real chance to tell my dad what he'd done to me and to make him face the consequences of his actions. At the end of the day, they're still my parents. Yes, they're incredibly toxic, and no, I don't love them the way most people love their parents, but the fact remains, they're the ones who raised me. A small part of me had been hoping maybe they'd changed, that maybe they missed me or regretted how things turned out. Update 2. 2 weeks passed after my last update, and I honestly thought that was the end of it. I figured my parents had gone back home, but today I found out how wrong I was. It was a quiet weekend, and I was enjoying the peace when my doorbell rang. Checking the camera, I froze. My parents were standing outside. I cracked the door just enough to talk, and they immediately asked to come in. I told them no and asked what they were still doing here. That's when my mom explained they hadn't left the city at all. Instead, they'd stayed behind to explore, and apparently, they'd fallen in love with my city. She went on about how everything here was so much better than back home, even the hospitals. She said they'd already spoken with a couple of doctors who gave them new hope about Dad's cancer. Then my dad stepped in. He admitted he knew I didn't want contact, but he insisted this was his last chance to survive. He told me he and Mom had decided to stay and begin treatment at one of the top hospitals here, and he expected me to pay for it. On top of that, because they'd be staying for months, he demanded I either arrange housing for them or let them live with me. He promised that once he was cured, he and Mom would leave forever and never bother me again. I just stared at him, thinking he'd lost his mind. I reminded him of our last conversation. I thought I had been crystal clear. I told them point blank that I didn't care where they got treatment, but if they wanted to stay in this city, they'd have to cover every expense themselves. I wasn't going to be part of it. My mom's voice started shaking, a mix of anger and desperation. She said if I didn't help, they wouldn't leave my doorstep. That's when it hit me. They were trying to trap me, to force me into giving in by sheer persistence and emotional manipulation. I'd had enough. I closed the door immediately and called the police. I reported my own parents for harassment. Honestly, I wanted them to learn a lesson, that they couldn't just show up and pressure me into doing what they wanted. When the officers arrived, my parents resisted, refusing to leave. That's what got them arrested. I can't lie, watching them being taken away was a relief. Afterward, I had to explain the whole scene to my neighbors, who had witnessed everything. I live in a quiet, respectful neighborhood, so it was beyond embarrassing that my parents had caused a spectacle like that. Update 3. Thank you to everyone who's supported me through this. I won't pretend I wasn't shaken after that day. The very next step I took was contacting a lawyer, and with his help, I secured a restraining order against both of my parents. The video evidence from my door camera of them threatening and refusing to leave made my case ironclad. The restraining order was necessary. I needed to know they couldn't just show up again and throw my life into chaos. They were released from jail since it was their first offense, but they had to sign an agreement promising to leave me alone. On my lawyer's advice, I also cut off the money completely. For too long, I'd been enabling their behavior by sending those monthly payments. After the way they acted, it was time to put an end to it once and for all. I also sat down with my boss and explained the situation. I wanted him to know the seriousness of it in case my parents ever tried to cause trouble at my workplace. Thankfully, he was very understanding, which gave me peace of mind that my career wouldn't be jeopardized by their antics. The situation with my parents is far from perfect, and I know they're still out there, but I feel like I've done what I needed to do to protect myself. For their sake and mine, I hope they finally leave me alone for good.